a million cliches about the freedom of the American road, but the fact of the matter is that freedom of movement and freedom of exploration are two of the most elusive freedoms in American society. The longer you're in a place, the more ties you forge. Those are ties you end up having to break if you ever want to explore the world around you for an extended period of time. You've got to have a job, you've got to make money, you've got to have a place for your stuff, a place to sleep, a place to store and cook food. So you become employed full-time, you sign leases, you sign contracts, you make down payments on things to make the life you have, the life in the place you've settled, easier and more pleasant. The freedom of the American road places a very distant second to the freedom of personal space, having your own home, at least for most people. And most people end up existing at the very margins of even managing that. I worked as a pizza delivery driver, I worked graveyard shifts at a gas station, I worked a year and a half at Panera Bread, and for 5 years at a pizzeria. For all those jobs, I worked schedules that changed several times a month, for 5 days out of the week. If I made $900 to $1,200 in a month, $500 to $700 of that was always earmarked for rent. The cycle of working to have a place to stay and a car to go to work and back is endless. It's only through luck and the generosity of strangers that I ever broke the cycle at all. I grew up with road trips. My dad was a die-hard Sierra Club member and introduced me early to the joys of nature and travel. But as an adult, I found freedom of exploration to be completely elusive. The desire to have real adventure, to throw myself into the world and let myself be polished like a stone in a tumbler, that never abated. But I had no time and no money and broken-ass, cheap-ass cars, so to fulfill that desire, I turned to video games. I grew up with video games too, of course, but their significance in my life became pronounced once I moved out and had to find full-time employment. Video games gave me beautiful vistas to witness, exotic lands to explore, and, most importantly, the illusion of agency and purpose that was so lacking in my daily grind. For most of my life, I've been city-locked, bound to my job, bound to my lease, using whatever money I could scrape together to make myself feel better about living a life that I wasn't really that invested in. In the YouTube community, especially travel YouTube, people make it seem easy to live a life dedicated to exploration and travel. And even talk down to people for holding leases and jobs, saying, hey, man, if you just want more from life, you just gotta go out and, grab it and stuff. I know from personal experience that the Grand Canyon might as well have been on the fucking moon for all my ability to actually reach it when I was working full-time. That changed for me only because of YouTube and the crowdfunding website Patreon. I started a few years back making videos about games written in the same style as my favorite travel authors wrote about real life, blending first-person experience with history, context, and analysis. And to my unending astonishment and gratitude, people wanted to pay me for this. That money ended up freeing me. I now live in a Volkswagen Bus, and I am 2 weeks deep as of this writing, into a lifestyle that I've only ever known as a virtual fantasy. The first game I ever played whose world felt vivid and real to me was the original Fallout. I was 11 or so, too young to get it all the way mechanically or thematically, but the art style was evocative, and it gave a very concrete sense of a vast space contained within the CD that held it. It lifted me out of a pretty rough family situation and placed me within a world that treated me as an adult, who could go where he wished and see what he wished, and maybe even do some genuine good for others along the way. Of course, it's a game made for adults, so that's not really surprising, but the feeling of freedom within that virtual world hit me like a ton of bricks. Fallout's been my favorite franchise ever since. It's influenced my taste in music, in cars, and technology, and it's influenced the way I ended up approaching real-world adventure when I was finally given the opportunity to seize some of it. New Vegas is my favorite of the franchise. Not only is the writing great, but I think it has the best world map. It's divided naturally into regions, using mountains, valleys, and monsters to distinguish and separate parts of the world from other parts. There are dense areas with points of interest clustered close to one another, and, critically, huge areas that serve no purpose other than to create a sense of isolation for the locations and monuments they did put way out there. Fallout, and many other video games, teach valuable lessons about exploration. They teach that the step-by-step journey is the majority of the travel experience, not simply going from one place to another place, but being actively present and engaged by all the spaces in between. They teach that the more remote something is, the greater the satisfaction in reaching it. They teach that simply looking at a thing and moving on is not nearly so rewarding as poking your nose into all its nooks and crannies, yielding a sense of having mastered a place. They teach you to allow diversions to become priorities, to put what you thought was important on the back burner, while your curiosity reveals something even better. There's a train of thought about video games dating back to an area where the pop cultural perception of video games was that they were all coin-operated amusements, that they are frivolous pursuits, wastes of time, that nothing simulated is truly valuable. I couldn't disagree more. Video games give us the opportunity, however limited and ephemeral, to pursue experiences that are actively denied to us in our everyday working lives. How many astronauts, race car drivers, military commanders, and international explorers can a society actually support, especially compared to all the clerks, janitors, call center representatives, and assembly line workers that a society actually needs? Within every one of us is the universal human desire for exploration and novelty, the desire to be someone significant and to do something or see something that no one's done or seen before. When you make minimum wage, your struggle is to put a roof over your head and put food on the table. There is no time, no money, no opportunity for adventure or for significance. To me, this makes the simulated adventure that video games provide the furthest possible thing from frivolity. It scratches an itch that would otherwise grow and grow until its unpleasantness overwhelmed us. Real and virtual adventure are now so completely intertwined for me that I'm at a loss to say which is the chicken and which is the egg in terms of how I experience and talk about both. I know a great deal of it came from my dad early on. He taught me to read maps, and the thrill that comes from seeing a dot on paper eventually blossom into a vivid, tangible place you actually go to. I still use paper maps because of this. A GPS is great for point-to-point navigation, but nothing gives you the big picture like an atlas or an area map. You see all the routes, all the points of interest. You connect the dots in a way that makes sense to you as an individual human, not just trusting the computer to do fastest available route. Games do this all the time. Compare navigating by GPS in recent Grand Theft Auto games to how New Vegas did it. Even if you've got a quest marker, you still have to open up the map and decide which mountain passes you want to walk through to get there. You have to make specific interpretations of the marker's general directional guidance. The player decides if they want to keep on the route or explore the dot on the map that they know nothing about. On the other hand, GPS is easier, its convenience is undeniable, but nothing quite gives you the whole context of your journey like an atlas. Did I learn this from my dad, or did I learn this from video games? Or do they simply just reinforce each other? My dad also taught me the value of going slow, examining your surroundings, to read all the plaques at the trailhead and to venture off all the trail spurs to see the vista points. To be really attentive to detail, to the history and the context of a place, both how a thing came to be and what it evokes in you, when you discover it for yourself. Video games have the unique advantage over books and movies by allowing this exact kind of environmental storytelling and environmental education to take place. Every audio log you've ever picked up, every melancholy skeleton you've ever stopped to examine in a game, is testament to this unique attribute. The most satisfying game worlds are the ones that take the time to provide history and depth, to give context to your journey as a player. Sometimes it's all very obscure, like Bloodborne, where you're trying to fit together tattered scraps of a story into something coherent, and other times it's completely encyclopedic, like the Dragon Age series, where your knowledge of the world comes from pages on pages on pages of letters and diaries and treatises, on top of the present tense experience of the place, and often it's a mix of many approaches. In any combination, environmental storytelling feeds the player's hunger not just for novelty and exoticism, but for context. To see something amazing is one thing. To genuinely comprehend it and be able to think about its place in the world and how it relates to your place in the world is quite another. It's why national and state parks dedicate so much time and effort and money to education and not just conservation. Meaning is partly derived from that kind of knowledge. That's a very old truism for Sierra Club types like my dad, but it's something that game designers have always taken to heart as well. There is more world out in the world than any single person could ever hope to see. I've just driven from Seattle down to San Diego with a lot of meandering detours along the way, and it took me 11 days and 2,000 miles. I drove right past the great majority of what I saw. The West Coast is just a slice of America, which is itself just a chunk of the whole of the continent. I'm keeping a slower pace as I go along, but it'll never be slow enough to truly know the places I pass through. The difficulty of trying to build history and context about a place is that details stack almost infinitely and change constantly over time. For people who never traveled beyond their own hometown, there are still mysteries and surprises, people you never or rarely talk to, streets you never walk down, businesses you never care to shop in. The further back in time you go, the harder it is to really even understand. Road tripping is a bit of an inherently selfish thing to balance out this equation. You will never know everything, but you will never even come close to comprehending the amount of things there are to know about a place. A great example of this comes from one of my all-time favorite travel authors, William Least Heat Moon. In his classic American travelogue Blue Highways, he covers a journey of about 12,000 miles that he spent the better part of a year doing in a 1975 Ford Econoline he called ghost dancing. That 12,000-mile journey takes 426 pages to get to the heart of for Least Heed Moon because, while he spends considerable effort talking to strangers and hearing their stories, the frame of the entire book and the lens of his entire experience is his personal, individual witnessing of the trip. His other masterwork, Prairie Earth, is 622 pages singularly about the history, culture, and landscape of Chase County, Kansas. He called it a deep map of the area, and even then, so much is left unsaid, like the blank spaces of any map between the dots representing known features. It is truly impossible to know any place completely. Most people, myself included, settle for surface-level summary, the gist of what a place is about and why I ought to care. Humans are self-absorbed creatures. Sometimes this is a negative attribute, like when we persuade ourselves to ignore suffering because it isn't our individual suffering. But self-interest is a powerful tool for actually making sense of incomprehensibly huge bodies of knowledge and experience. The road trip narrative sees everything through the lens of how it hits the traveler when they're there, how a place sticks in an individual's perception, and what the traveler takes with them when they go. Every small town in the world, from the plains of Kansas to the deserts of Argentina, has enough history and life and meaning to exhaust a person completely. So the traveler takes with them only what they can carry, the fragments of understanding that fit in the backpack and the glove box and the heart. It's utterly incomplete, but it's existentially manageable. Most video games mimic this experience in a remarkably exaggerated way. They do not exist when you're not looking at them. They do not physically exist, and more importantly, they are created by humans for humans. The deep time that books like Prairie Earth or John McPhee's Basin and Range try to tackle simply does not apply to them. Their histories are illusory, made up, works of fiction. There is usually more to do and see in a game than any single individual will experience anyway. The official guide to Fallout New Vegas, for example, clocks in at 448 pages, after all, and that only provides basic summary of what's found within, with no creative interpretation of the listed features. When people accuse games of being frivolous and lacking in artistic meaning, they often judgmentally single out this quirk of the format, opining that spiritual resonance and growth are supposedly only possible when confronting that which is larger than the human scale, the ancient, the incomprehensible, the cold indifference of the natural world. Games cater directly to the player. They are designed from stem to stern for the player's curiosity and amusement. They do not and cannot stand alone from a player's journey through them. One of last year's most notorious flops in the games market was No Man's Sky, an exploration game with a hook that it had 18 quintillion worlds to explore, that no one person could ever even see a fragment of what it had to offer. It was deep, supposedly, in the way that nature is deep, using math in this case to mimic natural processes and randomize landscapes, but with no context or history to any of the planets, with gameplay that exactly resembles in the 100th hour what you experience in the first, with no stopping point that wasn't driven by exhaustion and boredom. The vastness of the simulated universe felt completely pointless to most players. Because there was such a flat arc to the way the player could genuinely relate to the journey, its artificiality showed through brighter than it might have otherwise. I had a lot of complaints about that game, but I loved what it was trying to do, its efforts to show an endless succession of new places and give me the illusion of genuine adventure and exploration. To circle my ship around, look for a landing place, seek out activities and curiosities, to watch the sun rise over some place utterly foreign, and see the hills change colors, that was incredible to me. A lot of people flat out hate No Man's Sky because the sensation of endless nomad travel is all it was ever really trying to accomplish. I loved the game, despite its flaws, at least partly because of this rhythm of movement and experience was familiar to me from real life, from the few but unforgettable times that I felt the raw freedom of true exploration. The execution of No Man's Sky felt false and artificial after a while, but the ambition of the game was rooted in something very real and genuine. A feeling and a rhythm of being that is both beautiful and rare. No Man's Sky leans heavily on a travel philosophy that authors like Paul Thoreau and many others champion, which is that solitary travel is the best and purest form of travel. Thoreau dedicates an entire chapter of his anthology of quotations and advice about nomadism, the Tao of travel, to taking a hot shit on the idea of bringing the familiar with you when you go to the exotic. Yet, everywhere in travel media, the traveler reaches out for some kind of baseline of familiarity. In Least Heed Moon's Blue Highways, Ghost Dancing, his van, is a companion and a character as much as the people he meets. Least Heed Moon also reaches out throughout the book to his ex-wife, either explicitly over the phone or thematically in his personal melancholy and occasional deep cynicism. His experience is not one of pure nomadism, as Thoreau would describe it. He does not attempt to fully disengage the familiar from the exotic. Most authors don't. I agree with Thoreau on a lot of travel philosophy, but as a human and a video game critic, I think he's wide of the mark to discount how important a baseline of familiarity is, how valuable the ability to share an experience with others is in making sense of the experience. When John Steinbeck wrote his classic Travels with Charlie, he fictionalized huge swaths of it to make it seem like he was going solo and having that purity of nomadism that Thoreau and many others going back see as valuable, but he stopped frequently to have dinner with his wife and weekend with her in nice hotels. Why? I simply don't understand what would have been lost from the book if Steinbeck had simply admitted that loneliness is not always profound, and that he craved a familiar face with whom he could talk with about what he was experiencing. Purity of nomadism is pointless and silly, because nomadism itself is complex and often overwhelming. So I have not aimed for purity on my own trip. One of the absolute biggest complaints about No Man's Sky is that they had initially indicated that you didn't have to adventure alone, that somewhere out there you could meet another player, see evidence of their passing, share the experience. The fact that each player's experience was ultimately disconnected from others fed into the sense of artificiality that tanked the game in most people's eyes. Video games give an opportunity to have a communal adventure in a way that ranges from difficult to impossible in the real world. When you start a new game, every player begins in the same position, and although they end the game, by the end of the game each player will have gone through it in a different way, each player will still have had the broad commonality of experience with the others. When people talk to each other about games they've played, they are talking about having had a shared adventure, experienced separately, but the same narrative and the same general paths. That's why, in the best of circumstances, people who play games have felt a sense of community that movie watchers and book readers don't feel quite so strongly. They have walked these paths of adventure with millions of others, invisibly, intangibly walking next to them. Circling back into real-life adventure from games like I have, I've never related to the idea that an experience has to be singularly unique and solitary to be meaningful. We live in a media culture where Let's Play videos and companionable media are surpassing some of the traditional narrative television in reach, especially in the youth market. The desire to be told a story seems to have less of an appeal these days than to share in a journey that's unfolding. Let's Play videos preserve in amber that moment of novelty and discovery where an adventurer sees something amazing for the first time and then invites the viewer to share that sensation. Ideally, anyway. Definitely not always. For a while, I didn't really understand the Let's Play video format at all, but I feel like I understand it better now. Let's Play videos are a rejection of the fundamental idea that to travel alone is to travel best. 3 years ago, my friend Mitty and his girlfriend Rachel rolled into town in Sweet Pea, the 1978 Volkswagen Bus that they lived in. Mitty was the first friend I ever made in Seattle, and when I met him, he was living in Sweet Pea alone in the parking lot of the pizzeria where we both worked. I envied him his freedom. Theoretically, he could leave any time, while I felt effectively and permanently stuck. That was 6 years ago. And then 3 years ago, when he and Rachel came to town to visit, my then-girlfriend, now-wife Kendra's eyes lit up with the same envy mine did. We had been apartment-bound and unhappy with it for a long time. Neither of us liked our jobs, neither of us liked our neighborhood, neither of us knew what to do to wring more actual satisfaction out of the paralyzingly small paychecks we were bringing home. Mitty and Rachel's life in the bus was one of difficulty and hard work. They had just come off a season working a small farm, working all the daylight hours there were in a day, close to 7 days a week. But it was plain to see that they were more engaged with their lives than we were. We wanted that. Since I knew how to work on Fords and didn't want to copy Mitty, I wanted a fat old panel van like Ghost Dancing. But there was an old Volkswagen in my birth mother's backyard, sinking broken into the mud, untouched and mostly unwanted, that we were told we could buy for $250. In Seattle, you generally pay over $1,500 for that era of bus, even if it didn't have an engine or transmission. The bus we bought didn't run, but even if we failed to restore it, we were still going to have a very valuable machine at an absurdly low price, so we bought it. I talked to Mitty about how I was embarrassed to, seemingly, be trying to copy his life. Mitty said to me, "Do you think I'm the first person to do this? People have been doing the VW lifestyle for decades. You're not copying me. It's a tradition." And he was right, it is a tradition. Right now there are hundreds of people living in antique vans and buses. Like a game, it is a repeatable adventure, something that has commonality for everyone who chooses to engage with it, regardless of the individual variation. Like how the gaming community has a stronger self-identity than other groups of media enthusiasts, air-cooled Volkswagen enthusiasts find themselves with a heightened feeling of communal experience and struggle than other automotive subcultures. You have Ford families and GM families, but I've only ever felt the sense of a shared bond over an inanimate object that the air-cooled VW folks have when talking about virtual adventures with other video game enthusiasts. How there's a system of universal mechanics and systems, commonalities of sensation and struggle with incredible variation in how those challenges are overcome and those systems interacted with by the drivers. It was 2 years after I bought the bus that I was able to start spending serious money to try and restore it. It was only the modern miracle of crowdfunding that provided that money. My game reviews had caught enough attention that I could drop down to just a couple days a week at the pizzeria and spend the extra hundreds of dollars being donated on parts and repairs. While I've only been on the road 2 weeks now, my journey with the bus began years ago. And it hasn't been a solitary journey at all. An entire community of friends and strangers bore us along the way. To talk about travel as if it could even be a solitary activity for me seems to run counter to the fact of that support. A travelogue frames the journey from a single traveler's perspective because it makes the mass of experience and information easier to comprehend and to organize. It does not mean that the traveler began traveling simply because they decided to do so. If I had had only myself to rely on, I would have nothing more than a pile of rust and a lifetime of disappointment. The difficulty curve on fixing the bus was almost insurmountably huge. My wife and I were true partners in the dream. We each put just about all of our extra money and time and sweat into it for about 18 months. Even then, we couldn't afford to have it professionally restored. We would have to wing it. And if you haven't already guessed, a 44-year-old, 4,000-pound flying brick with a motor, so strange that it doesn't even have a radiator, requires at least some professional knowledge to diagnose and repair. I'd taken Auto 100 in one of my several half-hearted attempts at community college, but the most complicated thing I'd ever done was to take off and reinstall the carburetor on a Mercury Marquis I used to have. By the end of the restoration and the day of our wedding, I had had to learn how to read an electrical diagram and attach a brand new electrical harness to the engine, to replace the alternator, to learn how to install and statically time a distributor, to track down electrical shorts in the turn signal wires, on top of things I already knew how to do, like swap carburetors, replace ignition coils, put in a stereo, put on new tires, change out spark plugs, change out oil. All of these procedures had quirks special to the Volkswagen, approaches to engineering that made sense to VW that Fords I was used to would simply never pursue. In many ways, VW buses are genius machines in their simplicity, but the appreciation always comes after the fact, after hours to days to weeks to months of turning a problem over in your head, wondering what the fuck could possibly be going wrong. In the past 2,000 miles, we only encountered one mechanical problem. When we put the clutch in, it would rev really high, up to 4,000 RPMs, and would not come down until you tried to put it in gear again or shut off the engine. The revs wouldn't even come down when you took your foot off the gas a couple of times. I was stumped. It seemed like something would have to be deeply wrong to cause such a serious problem with the bus. We were just about to go over the Golden Gate Bridge while it was getting bad, so I pulled off the exit right before the bridge to try and fix it before we got into the city, but we ended up in Sausalito instead of a dirt lot like I was hoping for. Sausalito is one of the richest neighborhoods of the Bay Area. A man in a Ferrari eyed me suspiciously as I wormed in and out from under the bus, trying desperately to figure it out, covered in grime and dust and sweaty frustration. I called a VW specialist we knew in Seattle, and he asked if I had checked the throttle return spring. I never even thought about so tiny and cheap part as being responsible for such a huge-seeming problem. It's a 2-inch metal spring that pulls the throttle back to the idle position after you let off the gas pedal, which is attached by a long chain to the other side of the throttle. Foot goes down, chain gets pulled, revs go up. Foot lets up, spring pulls back, revs go down. If your spring isn't springy, you get the loud and dangerous and seemingly severe problem that I had experienced. A new spring cost less than $2, and it solved the problem totally. It was so simple, such a brilliantly simple mechanism. My appreciation for that mechanism was only learned after screaming on the inside for an hour or more. A satisfaction of both games and automotive repair is that each problem has a real solution, that there is an appropriate mechanical and creative response to any challenge or mishap. So much of the world is impersonally vast and impenetrably confusing. You ask, how do you live an ethical life? And I would struggle to even begin to answer. You ask, why won't the bus's starter motor fire when I turn the key? And I can immediately reply, have you tried putting it in third gear and rolling it backwards? The bus is an arcane, bizarre contraption, but it's lovable. The struggle with it is completely by choice. That's also something I've always looked to games to give me, a conflict I have the power to actually solve, a bad situation where I can be, for once, a victor, a puzzle that I can feel good about myself for figuring out. The Volkswagen is a damn sight more complicated and ornery and frustrating than any game I've ever played, but that's the real fun of it. Unlike a game, it's not meant to be beaten. It would still be rusting into oblivion if Kendra and I hadn't spent a year and a half of discretionary income fixing it. We even changed it to suit our purposes. Mitty helped us renovate the interior, tearing out closets and sinks so we could put a queen-size mattress in for our bed. Kendra's dad gave us a place to let the bus sit like a 1-ton paperweight while it wasn't running. He talked his friend Randy into helping us swap the camper roof for a high-top fiberglass roof. Mitty and Randy even ended up staying up for almost 24 hours straight, painting the bus as a wedding gift for Kendra and I. Mitty even asked the paint shop guy to look up what colors VW used in 1973, settling on Phoenix Red and Kansas Beige. Kendra went to town on the interior, turning the 14 by 5 foot space into a cozy nest of colors and fabrics. While I did the broad majority of the mechanical work myself, I still had to have it towed to a real Volkswagen specialist to be tuned and timed skillfully, and have the array of minor issues that I was completely stuck on sorted out. It truly takes a village to fix a Volkswagen. Pretty much every undertaking and sub-project I've done with a bus has been beyond the knowledge and skill that I had going into the attempt. But now I'm on the other side of it. The bus lives, and I live in it with Kendra and our dog Simon. I've only ever played one game that seeks to simulate these particular experiences, the loving frustration of keeping an aging, underpowered vehicle on the road, and the joy of taking it to places it was always meant to go but likely never would have gone if you hadn't tried so hard. It's an indie game called Jalopy. You must nurse an aging 2-cylinder Eastern European car, based on the cult classic Trabant, across Eastern Europe. Everything wears out. It's a constant struggle against entropy. You scrape together whatever money you can to keep it repaired, and in times of surplus, upgrade it. That car, the Leica, is a companion. It's a home. It's a constant source of both worry and joy. When you've reached the end of the road and turned a rusted heap your uncle gave you into a polished but quirky international cruiser, you've done something that resonates with the experiential truth of taking stewardship of an old rattletrap like the bus. The bus wasn't even close to being finished when I first played Jalopy, but playing Jalopy gave me hope for what might eventually be with the bus. When I did a video about No Man's Sky, I couldn't help comparing it to Jalopy. The starship you fly is the closest thing you have to a companion in that game. It's a home. It's a place to save your game. It's a place to store your resources and spend your resources, but it doesn't have any customization, besides broad category of ship. Each upgrade is incremental and based on what you can already do. Jalopy allows mechanical customization for the sheer willful individuality of it. The parts you buy do affect the vehicle in concrete numerical ways, but what you buy and the parts history of your vehicle is a mix of necessity and creativity. My Leica in the game has a carburetor found by the side of the road, a paint job purchased in the Czech Republic, 3 good tires, and the one I'm waiting to wear out a little more before I replace it. Our real-life bus, which Kendra and I named Loretta, is a similar hodgepodge. I put a dual exhaust on it because it was $20 more than the stock replacement and hooked up to the heat exchangers the same way. When I looked online for reviews for the exhaust, all I found was a lone forum thread asking if it was any good. About 14 people chimed in to say that it was crap metal from a crap company and you'd be insulting your bus by even putting them on, and then a 15th guy saying, they're loud, but I like them. I really enjoy the way that 15th guy thinks. I bought a vacuum advanced distributor only to not ever use that distributor because the timing has to be so far off from the factory setting to get it to work, and I'm not ultimately that comfortable with that. Kendra found a new roof on Craigslist, resting in the personal junkyard of some guy 80 miles away. We had what was called the Riviera Camp Top, a tent that pops up on the roof of the bus that sleeps an extra person. The campers from Germany were called Westphalias, and they came up at an angle. Riviera Camper is an American conversion that goes straight up and down. It was made in Oregon for a couple of decades. Either pop-top is totally wasted space when you're driving. They have to be clamped down tight during operation. Fiberglass high-tops are much less common. They reduce gas mileage. They make the bus even more at high risk to winds than they already are. But they do make the area above the roofline available 24/7. They made only a few tens of thousands of them from a few different companies back in the day. The roof Kendra found was a really unique one, too. It has a cargo rack in the back and makes the bus look kind of like a submarine. It's called, honest to God, the Adventure Top. The bus variation we have is called the Adventure Wagon. The guy ended up wanting our Riviera Pop Top, so we just swapped roofs with him, no money exchanged. With a new roof in hand, we had an attic and enough space to stand up in the kitchen office part of the bus, so we didn't lose any storage space ripping out the closet and putting in a roomier bed. Our stereo is a modern one, but it's designed like the old two-knob style, so it looks natural in the dashboard. We were given a tachometer for Christmas to fill the third spot of the dashboard, which is blank in most buses. Over 3 years, we have built the bus to be something completely shaped by our needs and our tastes. It's not a better bus because of the changes I've made, it's just different than other buses. Volkswagen purists would probably look down on Loretta as a total mutt, especially once they found out I have a single Weber 3236 carburetor, not the stock dual carburetor setup. Loretta even turned out wildly different than Sweet Pea, Mitty and Rachel's bus. Jalopy understood that not everyone wants a better automobile. They just want an automobile that's completely their own in every way. The whole living in the bus thing is at the very beginning for us, and we're hoping to keep it up for as long as we're happy with it. 2 weeks is just enough time to get a sense of the experience, to try out different rhythms and to drive different roads through different landscapes and feel out what's possible and what's pleasant. But this is not the beginning of the journey for me, it's somewhere very much in the middle. From when I was a kid hiking alongside my dad, to when I was 19 wanting desperately to be done delivering pizzas so I could play BioShock one more time, to taking inspiration from travel literature to make game videos, and now finally, taking inspiration from game videos to make travel videos. This is a linear path stretching as far backwards into my past self as I can remember. But now I'm done with the part I knew and into the part that I don't. My proudest accomplishment so far as a game critic has been reviewing Obduction, a spiritual successor to the classic puzzle game Myst for Polygon. Myst meant a ton to me growing up, Riven even more so, and getting a press copy of Obduction felt like totally uncharted territory. Playing before release made it even more like when I was growing up. No guides, no instruction, just me and the unfamiliar world. But unlike when I was a young teenager, I nailed it. I kept at the puzzles with a patience I never had back then. I looked at the details through eyes more open to the artfulness of the world than I had back then. I felt confident and professional and thoroughly present in both the world and myself. Although there's dozens of Let's Plays of it now, walkthroughs and FAQs, at the time I just felt like a true explorer in a series of worlds created for people just like me, people who want to challenge and surprise themselves. The humanity of the puzzles resonated with me as well. Each puzzle made perfect logical sense when you were done, no matter how many times you banged your head in frustration figuring them out. There was struggle, there was irritation, but the ultimate goal was delight. Everything about the game fired my imagination, from the vast machines out in the wilderness, to the art, the surreal and memorable contrast between what's familiar and what's alien. It's what I want out of travel and adventure, and I was getting it from a work of total fiction, a video game. My desire for adventure, unfulfilled, pulled me deeper into games when I left home. Games led me back around to true adventure. I don't have any fancy illusions that life in a Volkswagen Bus is easy. I own a trowel for bearing my own poop, for God's sake. But getting to the point of beginning the trip at all is a miracle in itself. It's the end result of all of my successes and all of my failures, both. All of my ambitions, both creatively and practically. Games have been so important to me, in large part because they mimic the freedoms of exploration and agency that I've been missing so much. These are freedoms that are fleeting and elusive even to people who do well for themselves and have lives that they enjoy. To have actually gotten to the point of exercising those freedoms on a daily basis isn't even an option for most people. I can't even stand it when van-dwelling books and websites make the "quit your humdrum job and do whatever you like" sales pitch, as if that was ever easy. I've only gotten here because a job situation manifested that was as portable as my camp stove. Everything I need fits into the bus. I've got love of wife and love of dog, food to eat with ways to cook it, and a 5-pound electronic brick that not only connects me to my patrons and my employers and the rest of the civilized world, but creates worlds, on demand, unfolding them from the raw math of game data. I've got a ratty old 4,000-pound wheeled house with a 1.7-liter motor to push it. This is as far as I've ever dared to dream in my life. What comes next isn't totally clear, but what I know for certain is that it all seems like a pretty fine platform for adventure.
Jesus.
Obduction, I know.